Ever get stuck on like the same thought over and over?
Like a song stuck in your head that you just can't.
Yes.
Ugh.
Or maybe you rewatch the same scene in a movie, like you can't move on.
You just have to see how it ends again.
That's exactly what we're diving into today. These like brain quirks,
Yeah.
perseveration, looping thoughts, even intrusive thoughts.
And they're really common, actually, especially for neurodivergent folks.
Right. The source you shared had a lot to say about this, and it really emphasized how important it is to know, like, what's what, so you can actually, manage them.
Because they might seem similar, but when you really get down to it, they're very different.
Totally. Okay, so let's start with perseveration. The source defines it as, like, this intense focus on one thing.
And it can be anything. I mean, it could be an activity or a topic.
Right, like your brain just hits repeat.
The example they gave was someone who just like brings up the same hobby in every conversation.
Oh, yeah. It's like they get so locked in, they can't see that maybe the other person is over it. Okay, so then how is looping different?
Looping is more about, I guess you could say verbal repetition.
So words getting stuck rather than the idea itself.
Yeah, like that broken record analogy. But it's words or phrases. They actually use the example of someone who keeps asking the same question even after you've answered it.
Wow. Yeah, okay.
And a lot of times what's interesting is what they're repeating usually ties back to some kind of worry or anxiety.
Which kind of brings us to intrusive thoughts, I guess.
Yeah.
Those are the worst. It's like they always pop up at the worst times.
And they're really hard to just ignore because they often focus on our biggest fears or insecurities.
So we've got these three things, and they're all different, but is there like a common thread?
Well, the source pointed out a few things. First, repetition is kind of at the core of all of them. Whether it's a behavior, thought, or phrase, it's that repeating element.
Right.
And then they can all be fueled by anxiety. It's like they become a way of coping when we feel out of control.
So it's our brain trying to like regain control.
Exactly. And we can't forget the neurology part of it. I mean, neurodivergent brains just work differently. These thought patterns are, in a way, just a part of how they process the world.
It makes you wonder if there are specific neurological differences that make these thought patterns, like more likely in those with certain neurological differences.
That's a great question. And honestly, it's something that researchers are still trying to figure out. But one thing's for sure, understanding these differences, it isn't about just giving something a label.
It's about figuring out what works for you, right? It's like,
Yeah.
how do you actually deal with this, right?
Yeah, it's not just about knowing the difference. It's about using that knowledge.
Feels like having a toolbox,
Yeah.
right? But what tools go in it? The source had some ideas.
They did. One of the things they mentioned that I thought was really useful was visual supports.
Visual supports?
Yeah, like using calendars, to-do lists, even just putting a note on your desk, things like that.
Oh, so it's like an external reminder.
Exactly. The source specifically talked about how helpful that can be for people who get stuck in those perseveration thought patterns.
That makes sense. Okay, but what about intrusive thoughts? Those can be so hard to deal with. Visual supports don't really work for that.
Yeah, they're different. The source actually talked a lot about mindfulness for that.
Mindfulness, like meditation and stuff.
It can be, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. Even just like taking a minute to breathe deeply or just noticing things around you, the sensations, it can really help.
Just like bring you back to the moment.
Right, because a lot of times those intrusive thoughts, they feed off of anxiety.
So if you can calm down.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got visual supports, mindfulness. What about looping? Any tips for that one?
Let me see, what did the source say about that? Oh, right. They said redirecting your attention can help.
Okay, so how do you actually do that, though? It's like my brain wants to loop.
It takes practice. But say you're, I don't know, replaying some awkward conversation in your head over and over. Instead of letting it keep happening, you could pick up a book, listen to music, I don't know, anything to kind of shift your focus.
So you're basically training your brain to think about something else.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And the cool thing is, the source connected all these strategies back to neuroplasticity.
Which is, remind me.
It's basically how our brains can change and adapt over time.
Oh, right. So by using these tools, we're actually changing how our brains work.
In a way, yeah. It's pretty cool when you think about it. You're not stuck with these thought patterns. You can actually work on changing them.
That actually makes me think about how all these things we've been talking about, they can kind of all happen at once, right?
Oh, absolutely. They can definitely feed off each other.
Like you get an intrusive thought, which makes you anxious, which leads to looping.
Exactly. Like that example from the source about the person who kept asking.
Are you sure about that? Like
Yeah.
over and over.
Yeah, that one. And they said that for this person, it was really about like this deep fear of making a mistake.
So it wasn't really about the question, it was about the underlying anxiety.
Exactly. And that's what the source wants us to take away. If you can figure out what's causing the looping or the perseveration,
Yeah.
then you can actually get to the root of it.
Instead of just trying to stop the behavior itself.
Right.
So it's like we have to be like detectives for our own brains,
I like that.
looking for clues.
And sometimes, you might need a little help with that. The source mentioned therapy could be a good option for some people.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's like having a brain coach.
Yeah.
Doing this deep dive, I'm realizing there's something kind of cool about all of this.
What do you mean?
Like these brain quirks we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's part of what makes us.
Us. Oh, definitely. It's about accepting those differences.
And understanding that it's not like a bad thing. It's just how our brains are wired.
And the more we learn about it, the more we can appreciate how different everyone's experiences are. Right. And hopefully support each other in finding what works, Because it's not about getting rid of these thought patterns entirely. It's about like figuring out how to live with them.
So if you're out there and you relate to any of this, you're not alone.
Not at all.
And your brain is awesome, quirks and all.
Absolutely.
And the more you know about those quirks, the better you can make the most of them.